So Brianna Bierschbach, who I adore, she's a fantastic journalist. She wrote a great story in the Star Tribune, and it had to do with the fact that we are now a sanctuary state when it comes to protecting those who are seeking gender-affirming care. In the article, she is chatting with Aaron Zimmerman, who is the executive director for the PFund Foundation, and he is kind enough today to join us because this article brings up some very interesting statistics that include the fact that Minnesota is indeed coming to a point a refugee state. Aaron, once again, thank you very much. I appreciate the time today.
Thank you, Matt. Thanks for having me here tonight as well.
My pleasure. Now, so first of all, let's talk about your organization. What exactly does the PFund Foundation do?
Yeah, great question. So PFund Foundation is a community foundation that supports the LGBTQ community across the 5-state upper Midwest, so the North and South Dakota, Minnesota, Iowa, and Wisconsin. And our job is to mobilize resources into our communities in order to advance equity for all.
And how long have you been working on this?
Yeah, I mean, this work has been, many years in the making, but honestly, we're just so thankful that our legislators took this bold action to designate Minnesota as a trans refuge state. And that has allowed us at PFund and a number of other organizations to really, move to action here.
Well, and it is interesting from what you described, the states you're working in, you have to have a very different approach depending on where you're working in at that point, correct?
Correct. And, our mission is not to make it so folks in North and South Dakota or Iowa right now are forced to move to a state that's affirming, but rather give them the option to have safe and affirming communities where they live and where their families are, where their community is, or if they so choose, come to Minnesota. But unfortunately, legislators in those states, as well as many other states across the country, have taken away that choice and really have kind of forced the hand for a lot of trans individuals and families with trans youth to have to make the choice to move here.
The bellwether for horrible is Texas. I mean, that's kind of the one that's been driving a lot of people away. Are any of these states as bad as Texas is right now, where it's, the Paxton is out there demanding hospital records from out of state so they can prosecute people? Is there anything that bad in the Dakotas or Iowa?
Every state's going to be a little bit unique. And each of the states are kind of, I feel like maybe anti-trans legislators are testing out different messaging, different laws and different strategies across each state. I know North and South Dakota are often, because they lean pretty heavily red, are often a testing ground for some really insidious bills. And also in states like North and South Dakota, there just isn't a huge infrastructure for LGBTQ populations to access things like housing, healthcare, and the like. So it's definitely pretty bad.
And so one of the things is the question is, once we became this refuge state, were we actually seeing refugees? And you've done some studying here and you've done some questionnaires, and indeed it sounds like Minnesota is picking up population, for lack of I think it's the correct term. It's refugees. We are picking up refugees from other states who are coming here because Minnesota is a safe place for them.
Yeah. We had that exact same question you had at the end of the legislative session, knowing that all these other states were experiencing kind of the opposite from us, which was, we were like, let's welcome folks here. We said, well, we need to know how many people that is. Is it going to be a dozen? Is it going to be, hundreds? And we got together with a number of other organizations and formed the Minnesota Trans and Intersex Resource Network. And we helped support with the funding Twin Cities Pride to really start to capture this. And it's working. Boldly stating that we are a trans refuge state has given folks the confidence to move, pack up their lives and move to Minnesota. And so we have seen just record numbers of folks moving here in it. And we know too that that's only a small segment. These are people who are actually filling out the survey, people who are knowing about this resource. And so we know that the numbers are much greater.
Well, and it's kind of to a point, people that are at a specific point in their personal journey versus, I have to imagine as well, just people who, with what's going on in the privacy of people's own homes, and they know, that there's this is something that might need to happen with them, and realizing that Idaho or Wyoming or Texas is not the place for them to be. It's going to be kind of hard to get a gauge here. But what are some of the numbers you're seeing as far as how many people from your experience that you can authoritatively say have definitively come to Minnesota as a refugee state?
Yeah. So in the first 6 months of collecting that data, we've captured on through this survey 150 individuals and families. And some of those families have multiple children, and one of those kids might be trans or gender expansive. And so the numbers are much higher. And but definitively, we can say, 150 folks have filled out the survey, said, I've already moved here recently. I'm moving here in the next 3 months. I'm moving here in the next 6 months.
And I should have also mentioned in the article that Brianna Bierschbach put out there, which I highly recommend, and I'll post later on, Tennessee, Florida, other states that have also put in some pretty atrocious laws on this. I have to imagine some of the stories you're hearing are with a lot of exasperation. We were hoping this wasn't as bad as we thought it was going to be. We were kind of pleading that wasn't, but when it became clear that we were targets in our own community, in our own homes, that they had to leave. I imagine that's a recurring theme you're coming across a lot.
Yeah, and honestly, it's emboldened employers and schools and other things. These laws, even though they're happening in the halls of legislators and at city councils and school boards, it's emboldening other folks to really take advantage of this. And we've heard stories of people being terminated for their trans identity because they know that there isn't going to be a huge repercussion against them because their state legislator is vastly supportive of that anti-trans kind of agenda. And so it's becoming really untenable for these folks. And so some of them are moving preemptively, knowing that this legislative session that we're entering into is probably going to be worse. And we're already seeing in states like Ohio, like things are getting worse, not improving.
The story that Brianna put out goes also down and talks about something which I guess shouldn't be a surprise, but it is also a little bit concerning, and I imagine it's something that your organization is working with as well, is that, sure, we're a refugee state, but we still pretty much only have the same amount of gender-affirming healthcare infrastructure in place that we had before. So now we have this incredible demand, and even references back to it's quite a few weeks delay now between, someone signing up for an appointment and being able to get seen, correct?
Correct. And, we in the survey, we asked what the number one concern for these families moving here is. Is it employment? Is it housing? And 90% of them, nearly 90, I think it's 89%, said healthcare is our number one concern, because that's what's really being targeted in these states is prohibitions against accessing life-affirming and life-saving medical care for especially trans youth. And we're already our systems are already burdened by the sheer number of people who need those services here in the first place. And so as we're thinking about the kind of solutions to really make Minnesota a welcoming state, that not only are we saying we're welcoming, we actually are showing up and for these folks moving here, but also for the folks that already live here. What is that holistic solution? And it's been really great to work with care providers like Family Tree Clinic, who was referenced in the, connected with in the article, but other organizations like Children's Minnesota, Park Nicolet's Gender Affirming Care Program, these other organizations about how are we going to meet this need? It's a momentous and historic kind of unprecedented experience that these providers are feeling.
And it's something that we're also seeing with the Planned Parenthood, with Minnesota being an abortion rights state, that they're getting overwhelmed as well in some of these locations. So it is an interesting problem that we're having. It's a great idea here, but now we got to follow through on some of this stuff. Aaron Zimmerman joining us right now, the PFund Foundation. He's the executive director over there. So if you could have your perfect world and you could go over to the St. Paul right now and say, hey guys, we need this, what would you say is the biggest priority? Is it an expansion? And give us an idea of what that would look like.
No, that's a great question. And, we've thought about this a lot. We've tapped into community. We've been working alongside both community members, care providers, and our legislators to kind of come up with a stopgap measure. And that is simply increasing the FTE of doctors, providers who are providing this care to our communities. And we've come up with some really fun, and exciting solutions that I think, are still in the works. We're talking with legislators now about, how do we train up more doctors, more providers, more PAs across the state, really, because when folks are moving from, say, rural Florida, they're not necessarily going to want to live in Minneapolis. They're going to want to live somewhere that's similar to the community that they've chosen to be a part of in Florida. And so we know we need to bring care across the state. We really need to be considering what the care provision looks like in places like St. Cloud, which, was referenced in the article as well, but Moorhead, Duluth, and especially these border communities where, you have to cross state lines in order to receive a very medically approved and like very like well articulated type of care.
And that brings up another interesting point. I mean, let's say Fargo. Let's say, you got Fargo, you got people there. You could have families that move to Fargo, stay in North Dakota, but are coming across the border into Moorhead to get medical care there. Is that something we're seeing a lot of right now? So it's not necessarily people, refugees into Minnesota, but a larger population of the gender-affirming population in these border towns.
Yeah, we totally are. And, organizations like Gender Justice are working on a lot of this too. Doctors have to cross, the onus, the like political and like criminal onus is on the providers in a state like North Dakota. And so doctors who were already providing this type of care have to cross the border and set up shop in Moorhead. So we're really seeing, and to Minnesota's benefit, we're seeing this just like boom of really progressive, really thoughtful and inclusive families moving across the border into Minnesota and making Moorhead the desirable place to live because they know that their doctor won't go to jail for, providing care.
Well, and I mean, let's face it, Minnesota kicks caboose. So it's a nice state. They got good wages. We got a heck of an art scene and really good music. And I think one of the things which is interesting, you brought this up, and this kind of goes into the larger healthcare issue. I'd love it if people could come from like rural Tennessee and move into rural Minnesota. But now we're dealing with the problems with these hospitals in rural Minnesota cutting back on all care, going down and getting rid of obstetric care and on these things. And so, this is a multi-layered, thick problem that, infringes on a lot of other problems too. But it requires, it'd be really cool if this issue in Minnesota got us to fix kind of the problems we're having in rural healthcare because, well, we need to make sure we have this demand. It's and I understand the hospital industry. They're a little money makers, but if they knew that they could make some money because we have all these refugees here and they could offer services, I think that'd be a win-win across the board.
Yeah. Our hope is that, as folks move here, they can access, trans people, gender expansive people, those families, they need all types of care. They need they need OBGYNs, they need mental health care, they need all kinds of care. We really have to tackle that problem. And I think for us at PFund Foundation, it really is about, how are we, bringing this kind of really marginalized group that's experiencing really traumatic, having to pick up your whole life in order to protect your family. We really want to make sure those people are cared for. And so, as we approach and work with our legislators, it is really thinking about that wraparound. Like how do we fully, how are we making sure that these folks get jobs, how they get housing? Because those are taxpayers. Those are people who are going to come here and contribute to our amazing state and the amazing communities that we have. So I feel like it's a real win for us to have folks wanting to move here and really contribute to this amazing state that we have.
Have you done any research on what could be an estimate of in the long run, how many people, how many families Minnesota might pick up nationwide moving here because of our progressive policies?
It's hard to say, I'm not, not a statistician by any stretch of it, but, I feel like it's a factor of what we've identified. It has to be, I've talked to real estate agents. I've talked to folks in the schools. They're seeing considerable movement. Like it's recognizable across a lot of industries. And so, in the long term, especially if things continue, if, depending on how, the presidential election happens, how these legislators continue to use trans folks as a wedge issue in order to further some other political agenda, it's going to be big, and for a community that is the size and that it is within the full population, 150 individuals and families is a lot of people, even considering. So whatever it is, it's going to have a ripple effects in the state.
Well, and you bring that up. I know people in the school districts that said this last school year started, and all of a sudden they had a lot of people that were not in Minnesota the year before that were here now. So I think it's coming across in multiple different issues, and obviously this one makes tremendous amount of sense because are you going to go someplace where they're going to threaten you, try to arrest you, try to run you out of town, or are you going to come someplace where, hey, you're welcome. Come on in. We'll do the best we can. But it clearly need to get an expansion of the healthcare options, the mental health care options, and just anything with expanded population. We have to look at housing. We have to look at all that stuff as well, too.
Yeah. And we're trying to bite off what we can chew at this point, which right now is that healthcare, because it's a big issue. And we've been working, PFund's been around since 1987. We've been working on this for a long time. The Outfront Minnesota and Gender Justice, and all of these organizations, Transforming Families, are doing really transformative work. But we've got to get resources injected into the ecosystem so we can address these problems.
Which brings up my final point to you. Obviously, your organization has a lot of need right now. You're not only are you having to work in lobbying politicians, but you have people on the ground that need help as they're coming here. So let's get people in touch with PFund Foundation. How do they find you?
Yeah, no, that's it. Thank you for giving that platform, because the work is, we've got a lot to do. So we're launching our Transcend campaign, which is a targeted, fundraising campaign that's geared solely towards our trans communities here in Minnesota and across the region, because we know that we don't live in a vacuum. And that you can find out more information about that campaign and how to support it, and then how to get connected into this work at our website, pfundfoundation.org.
pfundfoundation.org. That's PFUND foundation.org. I'll link to all this later on today. So just go to the social media pages, find it there, and make a donation, because once again, people are looking to Minnesota as a safe place. One of the things that needs to happen is we need to have the arms wide open and help in any way we can. Getting funds to PFund Foundation is a really good way to do that. And obviously, it's something there's a great need for it right now. Aaron Zimmerman, the executive director over at PFund Foundation. Aaron, congratulations on the article. Thank you very much. I really appreciate the time today. And by all means, let's have you come back before too long, okay?
Of course, Matt. Thank you. It's been such a pleasure.
An absolute pleasure to chat with you as well. Thank you very much.
Wonderful.
Let's take a break. Come on back. 952-946-6205, 952-946-6205. It's the Matt McNeil Show on AM 950.